February 23, 1944. A windowless conference room deep within the Japanese Naval General Staff headquarters in Tokyo. Captain Takeshi Naito, chief analyst for the 4th Section of Naval Intelligence, sat across from Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, deputy chief of the Naval General Staff. Between them lay a thin folder containing documents that had arrived from the Japanese embassy in neutral Sweden just 9 days earlier. The papers were translations of American Maritime Commission reports, publicly available information that any citizen could request from the United States government. Nothing classified, nothing secret, just routine bureaucratic records documenting merchant ship construction during 1943. Naito had spent the previous week verifying these figures through multiple independent sources. Agent reports from Switzerland. Swedish trade statistics. Analysis of captured American documents from operations in the Pacific. Photographic reconnaissance of American shipyards when weather permitted long-range flights. Every source confirmed the same impossible reality. He had checked his mathematics 7 times, certain he had misplaced a decimal point or mistranslated a crucial figure. The numbers refused to change. The Americans had built 1,868 Liberty ships during 1943, not 1,868 tons of shipping. 1,868 individual vessels. Each ship displaced approximately 10,000 tons. Total construction in a single calendar year, 18 million tons of merchant shipping. Fukudome studied the documents in silence, his face revealing nothing. He was a veteran of 30 years in the Imperial Navy, a professional officer who had commanded destroyers, cruisers, and aircraft carriers. He had helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack. He understood naval warfare, logistics, and industrial capacity, as well as any man in Japan. He looked up at Naito with an expression that mixed disbelief with something approaching despair. "This cannot be accurate," Fukudome said quietly. His tone carried no conviction. He was not stating a fact but expressing a wish, the desperate hope that the evidence might somehow be flawed. Naito pulled another document from his briefcase. "I thought the same, Admiral. This is a report from our commercial attaché in Stockholm. He personally observed American Liberty ships docked at Swedish ports during 1943. He counted 17 different vessels over an 8-month period, all recently constructed. He recorded their hull numbers." Naito paused, letting the implication settle. The hull numbers ranged from Series 300 to Series 1400, sequential construction numbering. The mathematics were inescapable. If Sweden, a neutral country with limited trade, received 17 different newly constructed American cargo vessels in 8 months, and those vessels represented serial numbers spanning over 1,100 units, then the total American production had to be massive. The embassy report wasn't intelligence analysis or propaganda. It was direct observation by a trained commercial officer documenting ships physically present in Swedish harbours. Fukudome set down the papers and walked to the wall map showing the Pacific Theatre. Red pins marked Japanese-controlled territory. Blue pins indicated Allied positions. The map still showed an impressive Japanese empire stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Central Pacific, from the Aleutians to New Guinea. But the trajectory was unmistakable. The blue pins were advancing, the red pins were contracting, and now Naito was telling him why that trajectory was irreversible. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The journey to this moment of terrible clarity had begun 2 years earlier, but its roots stretched back to fundamental miscalculations about American industrial capacity that predated the war itself. The Japanese Navy had tracked Allied shipping with meticulous care since the 1920s, compiling detailed registries of merchant vessel tonnage, shipbuilding capacity, and maritime trade patterns. But they had consistently, catastrophically underestimated what America could achieve when fully mobilized for war. This was not mere incompetence. The assumptions built into Japanese strategic thinking, shaped by Japan's own industrial limitations and the doctrinal emphasis on decisive battle, made American industrial power seem impossible, even fantastical. Japan's own wartime experience colored everything they believed about ship construction. By 1944, the empire had mobilized every available resource. Shipyards from Kure to Yokosuka operated around the clock. Workers put in extended shifts, sometimes sleeping in the yards between rotations. Construction of warships, submarines, and merchant vessels had increased dramatically from pre-war levels. Japan was building ships at rates that would have seemed unthinkable in 1939. The Mitsubishi Heavy Industries yards at Nagasaki, the Kawasaki facilities at Kobe, the naval arsenals at Sasebo, all were producing vessels as fast as skilled labor and available materials allowed. Yet despite this total mobilization, despite conquering resource-rich territories across Southeast Asia and exploiting their materials, despite the desperate intensification of production under military direction, Japan was losing the maritime war. The shipbuilding capacity that seemed impressive by Japanese standards was being overwhelmed by something operating on an entirely different scale. The fundamental Japanese miscalculation began with the attack on Pearl Harbor itself. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Combined Fleet and architect of the Pearl Harbor operation, had warned repeatedly that Japan could not win a prolonged war against American industrial capacity. He had served as a naval attaché in Washington during the 1920s and had traveled extensively across the United States. He had seen American factories, automobile plants, steel mills, and oil refineries firsthand. He understood what that industrial base could produce when fully committed to war. Yamamoto's warnings were noted, discussed, and ultimately dismissed by those who believed Japanese fighting spirit and tactical superiority would overcome numerical disadvantages. The assumption seemed reasonable based on Japan's recent military successes. Japanese forces had defeated Russia in 1905, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The Imperial Navy had successfully prosecuted campaigns in China despite limited resources. Japanese pilots and aircraft had proven superior to anything the Chinese could field. Why should the military leadership fear a nation whose Pacific Fleet Japan had just crippled at Pearl Harbor, whose army was scattered across the globe, whose pre-war military production seemed modest compared to Japanese output? But Yamamoto understood something his colleagues did not grasp. America was not at war during the 1930s. The Depression had idled massive industrial infrastructure. Factories sat empty, millions of skilled workers remained unemployed. Shipyards, designed to build dozens of vessels annually, were constructing just a handful. What looked like industrial weakness was actually enormous reserve capacity waiting for activation. The Japanese Navy's intelligence section had collected extensive data on American shipbuilding capability before the war. Their 1941 assessment estimated that American shipyards could produce approximately 1 million tons of merchant shipping annually under wartime conditions. This figure represented a substantial increase from the roughly 800,000 tons America averaged during the late 1930s. The assessment seemed thorough, based on documented shipyard capacity, number of building ways, and available workforce. The estimate was off by a factor of 18. During 1943, American shipyards produced over 18 million tons of merchant shipping, not 18 million tons cumulative since Pearl Harbor, 18 million tons in 12 months. This figure exceeded Japan's entire pre-war merchant fleet, which had taken decades to accumulate. America built more shipping in 1 year than Japan possessed after 70 years of industrial development. Captain Naito had access to these pre-war intelligence assessments. He had studied them carefully while preparing his report for Admiral Fukudome. The contrast between projection and reality was so extreme that he initially suspected the pre-war assessments had been sabotage, deliberate misinformation planted by pro-American elements within Japanese intelligence. But the assessments had been compiled by multiple analysts using standard intelligence methods. They represented honest professional work based on observable facts. The analysts had simply failed to understand that American shipbuilding capacity could scale in ways that violated every assumption Japanese experience had established. Traditional shipbuilding was a craft-intensive process requiring months per vessel. Skilled workers laid keels, fabricated frames, installed equipment piece by piece. Each ship was essentially custom-built with thousands of unique components. The Americans had industrialized shipbuilding. They treated cargo vessels like manufactured products rolling off assembly lines. The Liberty Ship program represented something unprecedented in maritime history: mass production of complex ocean-going vessels using automotive manufacturing techniques. The Japanese intelligence services received their first indication that something unusual was happening in American shipyards during mid-1942. Submarine commanders operating off the American West Coast reported unusual activity at San Francisco Bay and other coastal ports. Long-range reconnaissance aircraft, on the rare occasions they penetrated American air defenses, photographed shipyards with dozens of similar-looking vessels in various stages of construction. These reports were noted but not considered particularly alarming. America was building ships. This was expected. The industrial mobilization was clearly underway, but the scale remained unclear. How many ships? What types? At what rate? The Japanese Navy maintained a careful accounting of Allied merchant shipping losses. Submarine commanders reported sinkings. Each confirmed kill was recorded, tonnage calculated, vessel type documented. By the end of 1942, Japanese submarines had sunk approximately 450 Allied merchant vessels in the Pacific theater. Combined with aircraft and surface ship attacks, total Allied losses approached 600 vessels. This represented over 2 million tons of shipping sent to the bottom. The Japanese naval staff celebrated these figures as evidence that the submarine campaign was working. Surely the Allies could not sustain such losses indefinitely. American supply lines across the Pacific were being severed. The logistics required to support MacArthur's forces in the Southwest Pacific and Nimitz's operations in the Central Pacific would collapse under sustained attrition. Then the intelligence reports began arriving from neutral countries, and the mathematics stopped working. Swedish port authorities documented American ship arrivals throughout 1943. These records, available through normal maritime channels, showed dozens of Liberty ships calling at Swedish ports. Each vessel was new construction, delivered within months of commissioning. The hull numbers indicated production sequences running into the thousands. Swiss commercial intelligence, gathered through their extensive banking relationships with American firms, reported massive expansion of American shipyard facilities, new building ways under construction, workforce expansion programs training tens of thousands of welders and shipfitters, orders placed with steel mills for ship plate measured in millions of tons annually. Portuguese sources, maintaining trade relationships with both Allied and Axis powers, documented American merchant vessel traffic through the Atlantic. Ship counts increased month over month throughout 1943. The vessels were all new construction, modern designs, clearly not pre-war tonnage being reactivated. Naito compiled these reports into a comprehensive assessment during December 1943. The data from multiple independent sources all pointed toward the same conclusion. American merchant ship production was not merely exceeding pre-war levels, it was operating at scales that seemed physically impossible, according to Japanese understanding of shipbuilding. He requested additional intelligence from all available sources. What came back over the following weeks was compiled from agent networks operating in neutral countries, technical analysis of photographs taken by long-range reconnaissance aircraft, interrogation reports from prisoners captured during Pacific operations, and captured American documents, including training manuals and supply requisitions. One particular document proved especially illuminating: a training manual for welders working at Kaiser shipyards, captured when American forces abandoned a forward supply depot in New Guinea during a Japanese counterattack. The manual was intended for workers with no previous shipbuilding experience, teaching them basic welding techniques in a matter of weeks. The manual explicitly stated that Kaiser shipyards employed over 90,000 workers, producing Liberty ships at multiple facilities. Naito showed this manual to Admiral Fukudome during their February 1944 meeting. The manual indicates a single American shipbuilding company employs nearly as many workers as our entire shipbuilding industry, Naito explained, and this is only one company. Our intelligence indicates at least 18 different American shipyard facilities producing these Liberty ships. Fukudome absorbed this information with the methodical precision of a professional officer trained to evaluate evidence objectively. If one company employed 90,000 workers, and there were 18 facilities, that suggested a workforce exceeding 1 million people dedicated solely to merchant ship construction. Japan's entire shipbuilding workforce, including naval arsenals and commercial yards, totaled perhaps 200,000 workers. The disparity was not marginal. It represented a difference in kind rather than degree, but the most devastating comparison involved construction time. Japanese shipyards could build a standard cargo vessel, comparable in size and capacity to an American Liberty ship, in approximately 8 to 10 months. This timeline required skilled workers, established construction methods, and careful quality control. Reducing construction time below 8 months risked compromising structural integrity or producing vessels that would require extensive repairs during their service life. The captured American documents referenced Liberty ships constructed in 42 days. Some reportedly were built in less than 30 days. One vessel, according to multiple sources, had been constructed in under 5 days as a demonstration of American industrial capability. Naito had initially dismissed these claims as obvious propaganda, too absurd to credit. Ships could not be built in days. The welding alone for a 10,000-ton vessel would take many weeks. The American claims violated every known principle of ship construction, yet prisoners of war consistently reported seeing dozens of Liberty ships in American ports, all new construction, all bearing sequential hull numbers indicating massive production volumes. Captured American sailors spoke casually about Liberty ships as disposable vessels, built quickly and considered expendable. Some described ships being abandoned after minor mechanical problems, because it was easier to requisition a new one than repair the old vessel. The consistency across independent sources made dismissal impossible. The Americans were somehow building ocean-going cargo vessels in approximately 6 weeks on average. Peak production at individual yards achieved construction times under 2 weeks for hull completion, with additional time for fitting out and trials. The implications were staggering and immediate. If America could construct cargo vessels in 6 weeks while Japan required 8 months, then the production ratio was not merely 1-to-1 with more shipyards, it was a multiplication of capacity by time. An American shipyard could complete 8 ships in the time a Japanese yard completed one. If America had 18 major shipyard facilities compared to Japan's 7 principal commercial yards, the mathematical advantage was overwhelming. 18 American facilities, each producing 8 times faster than Japanese yards, meant America could build 144 merchant vessels for every one Japan produced. And these calculations assumed Japanese production operated at full capacity without disruption, while American yards faced no constraints whatsoever. The reality was worse than the simplified mathematics suggested. American production was accelerating while Japanese production struggled under the weight of resource shortages, labor constraints, and Allied submarine attacks on raw material shipments. The steel, machinery, and equipment required for shipbuilding had to be transported from conquered territories through waters increasingly controlled by American submarines. Captain Naito had prepared detailed charts comparing Japanese and American merchant shipping production. The data was clinical, undeniable in its mathematical certainty. During 1942, Japan produced approximately 600,000 tons of merchant shipping. This represented maximum output from Japanese shipyards operating at capacity. Germany, Japan's ally, contributed no Pacific merchant vessels, focused entirely on Atlantic operations and their own logistics. America produced 5 million tons of merchant shipping in 1942. The American advantage was roughly 8-to-1 in the first full year of war. Japanese naval planners had projected that submarine and air attacks would sink Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. The strategy depended on achieving a crossover point where losses exceeded construction, forcing Allied logistics to contract. The crossover never came. American production accelerated, while Japanese sinking rates remained steady or declined as American anti-submarine defenses improved. By 1943, the disparity had widened catastrophically. Japan produced approximately 800,000 tons despite desperate efforts to increase output. America produced 18 million tons. The ratio had expanded from 8 to 1 in 1942 to over 20 to 1 in 1943. Admiral Fukudome studied these charts with the expression of a man watching his professional certainties dissolve. He had spent 3 decades in the Imperial Navy, believing that Japanese tactical superiority, fighting spirit, and strategic positioning could overcome material disadvantages. The Battle of Tsushima in 1905 had proven that superior training and tactics could defeat a numerically superior enemy. The early victories at Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies had reinforced this belief, but the charts before him demonstrated something beyond tactical considerations. This was not about fighting spirit or superior training. This was mathematics. Cold, undeniable arithmetic that made Japanese tactical victories strategically meaningless. "How long can we sustain the attrition?" Fukudome asked quietly. Naito had prepared for this question. He opened another folder containing projections based on current sinking rates and construction capacity. "Our submarines and aircraft are sinking approximately 50 Allied merchant vessels monthly in the Pacific Theater. That represents roughly 300,000 tons of shipping monthly, or 3.6 million tons annually." "That seems adequate too," Fukudome began. "America built 18 million tons last year, Admiral," Naito interrupted gently. "Even if we increased our sinking rate 5-fold, even if we sank 300 vessels monthly instead of 50, American production would still exceed losses by over 12 million tons annually." The mathematics were brutal. Japan was winning individual tactical victories, sinking ships, killing sailors, disrupting supply lines temporarily. But the strategic picture was one of inevitable defeat through simple industrial attrition. America could absorb losses that would cripple Japan and continue expanding their logistics capacity month after month. Fukudome walked back to the wall map. What about German U-boats in the Atlantic? Combined Axis efforts, German sinking rates peaked in 1942 at approximately 6 million tons in the Atlantic, Naito said. But America built 5 million tons that year for Pacific operations alone. British shipyards contributed an additional 3 million tons. Canadian yards added another million. Combined Allied construction exceeded German sinking rates even during Germany's most successful year. The Admiral understood what Naito was telling him. The submarine campaign, the cornerstone of Japanese strategy for strangling American logistics, had already failed. Not through any deficiency of Japanese submarine crews or tactics. The submarines were sinking ships successfully, but they were fighting against arithmetic itself, and arithmetic always wins. The specific mechanism of American success, the Liberty Ship program, represented an industrial methodology that Japan could not match or replicate. The captured training manuals and technical documents revealed construction methods that violated traditional Japanese shipbuilding practice. American Liberty ships were welded, not riveted. This alone represented a fundamental difference in construction philosophy. Riveting was time-intensive but proven technology. Skilled riveters drove thousands of individual fasteners through pre-drilled holes, creating strong mechanical joints. The process was slow but reliable. Japanese shipyards employed riveting extensively, considering it the proper method for quality construction. Welding was faster but required different skills and presented different challenges. The Americans had apparently solved these challenges through systematic training programs, standardized procedures, and quality control methods that Japanese shipyards had not developed. More significantly, Liberty ships were constructed using prefabrication and assembly line techniques borrowed from automotive manufacturing. Rather than building each ship sequentially from keel up, Americans fabricated entire sections in parallel, then assembled them like enormous building blocks. Bow sections, stern sections, deck assemblies, engine rooms, all built simultaneously in different areas of the shipyard, then brought together in coordinated operations. Japanese shipyards built sequentially. Keel first, then frames, then plating, then decks, then superstructure, then equipment installation. Each step followed the previous step in linear progression. This traditional method produced quality vessels, but could not achieve the speed American yards demonstrated. The Americans had essentially treated ships as manufactured products rather than individually crafted vessels. They standardized components, used identical designs across multiple yards, trained specialized workers for specific tasks rather than requiring comprehensive shipbuilding knowledge. They had industrialized maritime construction in ways that Japanese shipbuilding tradition considered inappropriate, even disrespectful to the craft. But the Liberty ships worked. They carried cargo, crossed oceans, survived combat conditions. Whether built properly according to traditional standards became irrelevant when American methods produced 20 times more shipping than Japanese yards. Captain Naito had included in his report detailed analysis of what this production disparity meant for Japanese strategic options going forward. The projections were comprehensive, calculated with the same mathematical precision that had revealed the production gap. If current trends continued, by mid-1944, American logistics capacity in the Pacific would exceed Japanese capacity by ratios approaching 30-1. By 1945, the ratio would likely reach 50-1 or higher. Japanese forces, no matter how well trained or tactically proficient, could not sustain combat against such overwhelming logistical superiority. Every island garrison Japan reinforced required shipping to transport troops, equipment, ammunition, food, and fuel. Every defensive position required continuous supply. Every naval task force needed fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and provisions. The shipping required to sustain Japanese forces across the Pacific was finite and declining, as Allied submarines and aircraft sank vessels faster than Japanese yards could replace them. American forces faced no such constraints. They could support multiple simultaneous offensives across different Pacific sectors because their logistics capacity exceeded operational requirements. When American forces captured an island, supply ships arrived, within days carrying construction equipment, fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, replacement equipment, all in quantities that exceeded immediate needs. Japanese commanders observing American operations through intelligence reports noted this abundance with increasing alarm. Captured American supply dumps contained more material than entire Japanese armies possessed. American artillery fired support missions consuming more ammunition in hours than Japanese units received in weeks. American vehicles operated without fuel constraints, while Japanese forces rationed every drop of gasoline. The mathematical projections in Naito's report concluded with professional certainty that Japan could not win the war through military means given current industrial balance. This was not defeatism or political opinion. It was objective analysis based on verified data. The conclusion was professional assessment that should inform strategic decision-making. Admiral Fukudome read this conclusion in silence. He understood what Naito was telling him. The war was lost, not on any battlefield, but in American shipyards producing vessels faster than Japanese forces could sink them. The decisive battle the Japanese Navy had trained for, planned for, shaped its entire doctrine around, would never matter. America would win through industrial attrition, through overwhelming logistics superiority that made tactical considerations irrelevant. "What do you recommend?" Fukudome asked finally. Naito chose his words carefully. Recommending surrender or negotiated settlement was politically dangerous, potentially treasonous. Officers who suggested anything less than absolute commitment to victory faced severe consequences, but professional integrity required honest assessment. The industrial balance suggests that continued offensive operations will consume irreplaceable resources without achieving strategic objectives, Naito said carefully. Defensive operations that extend the war while seeking diplomatic settlement may preserve some negotiating position. But decisive military victory against an enemy with such overwhelming industrial advantage is mathematically improbable. It was as close to recommending surrender as Naito could come without explicitly stating the unthinkable. Fukudome understood the implication. He had reached the same conclusion himself during the previous week as he reviewed the intelligence data. But knowing the war was unwinnable and acting on that knowledge were different things entirely. The Japanese military command structure, the political leadership, the emperor himself, all were committed to absolute victory or honorable death. The concept of surrendering while still holding significant territory, while forces remained capable of fighting, contradicted everything Japanese military tradition taught. Fukudome thanked Naito for his analysis and dismissed him. The captain left the folder containing all the supporting documentation, the charts comparing production rates, the agent reports from neutral countries, the captured American technical manuals, evidence of inevitable defeat, compiled with professional competence, presented with mathematical clarity. The folder was filed and largely ignored. Fukudome prepared a sanitized summary for higher command that acknowledged American production increases but emphasized continued Japanese fighting capability. The summary noted that American industrial capacity exceeded initial projections, but suggested that this advantage could be countered through improved tactics, more aggressive submarine operations, and better coordination with German forces. The summary said what leadership wanted to hear. It transformed a mathematical certainty of defeat into a tactical challenge that might be overcome through effort and determination. The raw intelligence data, the charts showing 20-to-1 production advantages, the projections indicating inevitable strategic collapse, all were buried in classified files where they would not undermine morale or fighting spirit. Other Japanese officers reached similar conclusions through different paths. Admiral Takejiro Onishi, who would later organize the Kamikaze Special Attack Forces, understood by mid-1944 that conventional operations could not prevent American victory. His response was to develop suicide tactics that might inflict sufficient casualties to make American leaders reconsider the cost of invasion. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who became commander of the combined fleet after Admiral Koga's death in March 1944, privately acknowledged to staff officers that Japan faced inevitable defeat, but he continued planning operations, issuing orders, committing forces to battles that intelligence analysis indicated could not achieve strategic objectives. The disconnect between what Japanese intelligence knew and what Japanese leadership would accept grew wider as 1944 progressed. Each month brought new evidence confirming the production gap. Each intelligence report documented American logistics operations on scales Japanese forces could not match. Each analysis reached the same conclusion. Continued fighting would only increase the magnitude of ultimate defeat without changing the outcome. In June 1944, Captain Naito prepared an updated assessment following the American invasion of Saipan. The invasion fleet included over 800 ships, more vessels than the entire Japanese Navy possessed. The logistics support for the Saipan operation exceeded the total shipping capacity Japan could deploy across the entire Pacific theater. American forces landed with overwhelming firepower, unlimited ammunition, continuous air support, and logistics that delivered fresh water, hot meals, and mail from home to frontline troops within days of landing. Japanese defenders fought courageously, inflicting significant casualties. But they fought without resupply, without reinforcement, without hope of victory. The battle's outcome was determined before the first shot fired by the disparity in logistics capacity documented in Naito's reports. The intelligence assessment of Saipan included a section that Naito knew would never reach senior leadership. He wrote it anyway, maintaining professional integrity even when he knew the analysis would be suppressed. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Saipan operation demonstrates conclusively that American logistics capacity now exceeds Japanese capacity by factors making defensive operations unsustainable. Enemy forces can concentrate overwhelming material superiority at any point they choose. Our forces cannot prevent landings, cannot contest logistics superiority, cannot sustain defensive positions against unlimited ammunition and firepower. The mathematics of attrition make defeat at Saipan and subsequent operations inevitable regardless of tactical performance. This section was removed before the report reached Admiral Toyoda. The sanitized version emphasized Japanese fighting spirit and casualties inflicted on American forces, while omitting the underlying industrial analysis that made such fighting strategically meaningless. By late 1944, the Liberty ship production that had so shocked Captain Naito in February reached its cumulative impact. America had launched over 2,500 Liberty ships since 1941. These vessels, combined with other merchant ship types and captured Japanese shipping, gave American forces logistics capacity that exceeded operational requirements. Supply ships waited in harbors for cargo. Transport vessels sat idle waiting for troops to move. Tankers delivered fuel in quantities exceeding immediate needs. The Americans had achieved logistics abundance, the state where material supply exceeded demand, allowing commanders to operate without resource constraints. Japan had achieved the opposite, logistics desperation. Every operation required careful calculation of available shipping. Every convoy risked submarine attack. Every supply run might be the last. Japanese commanders made tactical decisions based primarily on logistics availability rather than strategic opportunity. The contrast appeared starkly in the Philippine campaign beginning in October 1944. American forces invaded Leyte with logistics support including hundreds of cargo vessels, dozens of tankers, fleet oilers providing mobile refueling, repair ships, hospital ships, ammunition ships, provision ships, every category of logistics support vessel in quantities exceeding immediate needs. Japanese forces defending the Philippines operated with fuel stocks so limited that the combined fleet's movement was constrained by available oil. The plan for the Battle of Leyte Gulf explicitly acknowledged that Japanese carriers would operate without adequate fuel for extended operations. Surface ships would make one-way voyages, lacking fuel for return trips. The operation was designed around fuel constraints rather than tactical optimization. The battle itself demonstrated what Captain Naito's intelligence analysis had predicted 18 months earlier. Japanese forces fought skillfully, executed complex operational plans, achieved some tactical surprises. But they fought with declining fuel stocks, limited ammunition, and no possibility of replacement losses. American forces fought with unlimited logistics, continuous replacement of losses, overwhelming firepower. Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 9 destroyers at Leyte Gulf. These losses were irreplaceable. The shipyards that might build replacement vessels were operating at maximum capacity, merely maintaining existing fleet strength against steady attrition. Each lost ship reduced Japanese capabilities permanently. American losses at Leyte Gulf included 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. These losses were replaced within months by vessels already under construction in American shipyards. Within 6 months, American naval strength in the Pacific would exceed pre-Leyte levels. The industrial capacity documented in Liberty ship production figures ensured that tactical victories meant nothing against an enemy who could absorb losses and grow stronger. Captain Naito survived the war. In the final months, he worked to preserve naval intelligence archives, understanding that accurate historical record would be valuable for future generations, even if current leadership rejected intelligence analysis. After Japanese surrender, he provided extensive interviews to American naval intelligence officers, explaining Japanese assessments of American capabilities and where Japanese analysis had succeeded or failed. He told American interrogators about the February 1944 meeting with Admiral Fukudome, about the Liberty ship production figures that had revealed the mathematical impossibility of Japanese victory, about how intelligence had documented inevitable defeat 18 months before surrender, yet leadership had continued fighting. The American officers were surprised to learn how accurate Japanese intelligence had been about American production capabilities. They had assumed Japanese leadership simply didn't understand American industrial capacity. Naito explained that Japanese intelligence understood quite well. The problem was not intelligence failure, but leadership's refusal to accept intelligence conclusions that contradicted ideological commitment to victory. Admiral Fukudome also survived, though he faced war crimes prosecution for his role in planning operations that resulted in atrocities. During his testimony at trial, he acknowledged that by mid-1944, he personally believed Japan could not win militarily, but saw no alternative to continued fighting. Surrender while holding territory was unthinkable. The concept contradicted every principle of Japanese military culture. The story of Japanese intelligence analysis during World War II reveals profound truths about modern warfare that remain relevant 8 decades later. Industrial capacity determines victory in total war between modern industrial nations. Courage, skill, tactical brilliance, ideological fervor, all these matter, but they cannot overcome overwhelming material disadvantage sustained over time. The Japanese discovered this truth through careful analysis of American Liberty ship production, systematic intelligence, gathering from multiple sources, and rigorous mathematical calculation. They presented this truth to their leadership repeatedly throughout 1944 and 1945. Their warnings were acknowledged but ultimately ignored because accepting them meant accepting inevitable defeat. The Liberty ship production figures that shocked Captain Naito in February 1944 were not secret weapons or classified technologies. They were publicly available information, routine Maritime Commission reports that any American citizen could request. Their power lay not in revealing secrets, but in demonstrating reality. America could produce, transport, and deploy merchant shipping at scales Japan could not match or even approach. This simple truth, confirmed through careful intelligence analysis, determined the Pacific War's outcome more surely than any naval battle. Logistics is the unglamorous but essential foundation of military power. An army without transportation cannot maneuver. A navy without fuel cannot operate. Forces without ammunition cannot fight. Superior tactics mean nothing when commanders lack the material means to execute operations. The mathematical impossibility of Japanese victory became clear to professional intelligence analysts by mid-1944. Every subsequent month confirmed and amplified this conclusion with additional evidence. American production increased while Japanese production stagnated or declined under Allied bombing and resource constraints. The human cost of ignoring these intelligence assessments was staggering and tragic. Japan fought for approximately 15 months after intelligence services concluded. Victory was mathematically impossible. Millions died in fighting that professional analysts knew could not change the ultimate outcome. Cities were firebombed, populations decimated, industrial infrastructure destroyed, all while intelligence reports sat in files documenting the mathematical certainty of defeat through industrial attrition. The tragedy was not simply that Japan lost. The tragedy was that the loss was predictable, documented and presented to leadership who could not accept mathematical reality because it contradicted ideological commitment and military tradition. The Japanese intelligence analysts who studied American Liberty ship production performed their professional duties with competence and integrity. They gathered information from multiple independent sources. They analyzed data carefully and systematically. They presented conclusions based on evidence rather than ideology or wishful thinking. Their work represented what intelligence services should do, provide accurate assessments to enable informed decision-making. That their conclusions were largely ignored represents failure not of intelligence, but of leadership, unwilling to accept unpleasant truths that contradicted core beliefs. The mathematical proof of Japanese defeat existed in Liberty ship production figures, showing America building 18 million tons of merchant shipping annually, while Japan produced less than 1 million tons. It existed in construction time, comparisons showing American yards completing vessels in 6 weeks while Japanese yards required 8 months. It existed in logistics capacity data showing American forces operating with material abundance while Japanese forces rationed every resource. It existed in attrition calculations showing that even dramatically increased Japanese sinking rates could not overcome American production advantages. The proof was comprehensive, verified from multiple sources, mathematically undeniable, and systematically filed away by those with power to act on it. Looking back from the perspective of 8 decades, the Japanese intelligence assessments of 1944 appear both prescient and tragically futile. The analysts were correct in every major conclusion. Victory was mathematically impossible given the industrial balance. The arithmetic of attrition made defeat inevitable. No amount of tactical skill, fighting spirit, or battlefield success could overcome such fundamental material disadvantage sustained over years of conflict. But this knowledge changed nothing because leadership chose to believe in willpower, divine protection, and national destiny rather than arithmetic. The war continued until Japan's complete military collapse, until cities were ashes, until hundreds of thousands died at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, until millions more perished in combat, until the emperor himself acknowledged defeat. The evidence was written not in captured documents but in occupied territory and unconditional surrender. The lesson from this historical episode transcends World War II and remains relevant for understanding conflict between modern industrial powers. Accurate intelligence is worthless if leadership refuses to accept unwelcome conclusions. Systematic analysis means nothing if decisions are based on ideology rather than evidence. Professional competence becomes irrelevant when confronted with institutional blindness reinforced by military culture. Japanese intelligence provided accurate assessment of enemy capabilities and probable outcomes. Japanese leadership chose comfortable fiction over uncomfortable reality, and the result was catastrophe that might have been limited or mitigated through earlier acceptance of mathematical truth. Wars between industrial powers are fundamentally economic contests won in factories before outcomes are decided on battlefields. This principle was proven definitively in the Pacific War. Japan's intelligence analysts understood this by early 1944. They documented it meticulously. They presented it clearly through official channels. They warned repeatedly that continued fighting would only increase the magnitude of ultimate defeat without changing the outcome. Their leadership never accepted this truth. The cost of that refusal was measured in millions of lives, destroyed cities, and Japan's total destruction as a military power. In February 1944, the Liberty ship production figures represented evidence of a simple but decisive reality. America could produce more, transport more, and deploy more merchant shipping than Japan could sink or match. This advantage was not marginal. It was overwhelming, sufficient to make Japanese defeat inevitable, regardless of battlefield performance or tactical excellence. 3-to-1 advantages in production can be overcome through superior tactics, better equipment, advantageous strategic positioning. 5-to-1 advantages present serious challenges but might be contested through concentration of forces and interior lines of communication. 20-to-1 advantages cannot be overcome except through enemy mistakes so catastrophic as to be strategically implausible. The American advantage in merchant shipping production exceeded 20-to-1 and was growing larger over time as Japanese capacity declined while American capacity expanded. By late 1944, the disparity had become visible even to frontline troops who had no access to intelligence assessments or production statistics. Japanese soldiers on bypassed islands watched American supply. Convoys passed daily, hundreds of ships moving freely across waters that Japanese submarines could no longer effectively patrol. Japanese naval personnel saw American task forces operating with logistics trains that exceeded the entire Japanese merchant fleet. Japanese aircrews faced American formations so numerous that tactical victory became meaningless because destroyed aircraft were replaced within days. The industrial reality documented in Liberty ship production figures had become operational reality experienced by every Japanese service member. America's overwhelming logistics capacity meant they could sustain multiple simultaneous offensives, absorb losses without operational impact, concentrate overwhelming force at any chosen point, and maintain this superiority indefinitely, because their production exceeded their consumption by enormous margins. Japan's declining logistics capacity meant defensive operations consumed irreplaceable resources. Tactical victories gained nothing, because forces could not exploit success. Every loss reduced capabilities permanently, and strategic options contracted steadily as shipping losses exceeded construction. The mathematics were visible to anyone who cared to observe, yet leadership continued committing forces to operations that intelligence analysis indicated could not achieve strategic objectives. The Battle of Okinawa in April through June 1945 demonstrated these principles with brutal clarity. American forces invaded with logistics support, including over 1,400 ships. The invasion fleet itself exceeded Japan's entire merchant marine capacity. American forces landed with unlimited ammunition, continuous reinforcement, overwhelming air support, and logistics that delivered everything from fresh water to ice cream to frontline troops. Japanese defenders fought from prepared positions with courage and determination. They inflicted over 50,000 American casualties, the highest Allied losses of any Pacific campaign. They sank dozens of ships through kamikaze attacks and conventional defense. They made America pay heavily for every yard of territory. But they fought without reinforcement, without resupply, without hope. The defenders knew from the first day that they would receive no support, that logistics did not exist to supply defensive operations, that their mission was to inflict maximum casualties before inevitable defeat. The battle's outcome was determined before the first landing craft hit the beach by the industrial disparity documented in Captain Naito's intelligence reports 15 months earlier. After Okinawa's fall in June 1945, Japanese planners prepared for the final defense of the home islands. Operation Ketsugo, the Homeland Defense Plan, projected that invasion would cost America such horrific casualties that negotiated settlement might be achieved. The plan depended on mobilizing every remaining resource, arming civilians with bamboo spears, organizing suicide attacks on massive scale, making invasion so costly that America would accept terms short of unconditional surrender. Japanese intelligence analysts preparing assessments for Ketsugo understood that the plan was fantasy disconnected from mathematical reality. America's industrial capacity, demonstrated through 3 years of Liberty ship production and overwhelming logistics operations, meant they could sustain whatever casualties the invasion required. American production would replace losses. American logistics would support operations indefinitely. American resolve would not break because their industrial base ensured victory was merely a question of time and acceptable cost. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945, ended the war before Operation Ketsugo could be tested. But the industrial reality remained unchanged. America possessed overwhelming material superiority, derived from production capacity that Japan could never match. Whether through atomic weapons, conventional invasion, or continued blockade and bombing, Japanese defeat was mathematically certain. The Emperor's surrender, broadcast on August 15, 1945, acknowledged that the war situation had developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. The understated phrasing masked the catastrophic reality. Japan had been fighting for over a year after its own intelligence services concluded that victory was impossible. The decision to continue fighting, to reject mathematical analysis in favor of ideological commitment, cost hundreds of thousands of additional lives and destroyed what remained of Japan's industrial capacity and urban infrastructure. Captain Naito, reflecting on his intelligence work during post-war interviews, expressed the tragedy simply. "We knew. The data was clear. America's industrial capacity made our defeat inevitable once they fully mobilized. The Liberty ship program demonstrated this beyond any doubt. But knowing the truth and acting on it are different things. We could document reality. We could present evidence. We could calculate probabilities. But we could not change decisions made for reasons that had nothing to do with analysis or mathematics. In the end, Japanese analysts studied American Liberty ship production figures and understood they could never win, not through any single revelation but through accumulation of undeniable evidence over months. Each intelligence report added data points. Each production statistic confirmed patterns. Each neutral country observation provided validation. Each captured document corroborated previous assessments. The picture that emerged was complete, verified, mathematically certain. Japan faced an enemy with 20 times its industrial capacity in merchant shipping production, and that gap was widening throughout 1944 and 1945. No amount of tactical skill or fighting spirit could overcome such fundamental disparity in a war of industrial attrition. The analysts knew this, documented it meticulously through official intelligence channels, and presented it clearly to leadership, who had authority to act. Their tragedy was not analytical failure, but the institutional irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership makes decisions based on ideology, tradition, and cultural values that cannot accommodate uncomfortable mathematical truths. The Liberty ship production figures told a story of inevitable defeat written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed, except through willful blindness. They showed American industrial abundance that seemed impossible according to Japanese experience but was verified through multiple independent sources from neutral countries, captured documents, prisoner interrogations, and photographic reconnaissance. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming industrial capacity that Japanese hopes of military victory were fantasies disconnected from material reality. The only question remaining by mid-1944 was how long Japan would deny what the numbers made clear. How many more would die before arithmetic replaced ideology as the basis for strategic decisions? That question was answered on August 15, 1945, when Japan surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by superior tactics or battlefield victories, but by the mathematical certainty that industrial capacity determines victory in modern total war between industrial nations. The intelligence analysts who first studied those Liberty ship production figures in early 1944 had understood this truth 18 months before surrender. They had tried to warn their leadership through proper channels. They had presented the evidence in classified reports. They had shown the mathematics in detailed charts and projections. Their warnings were filed and largely ignored, and millions paid the price for that institutional blindness, that inability to accept mathematical reality when it contradicted cherished beliefs about fighting spirit and national destiny. The Liberty ship production figures documented not just American industrial capacity, but the futility of fighting against overwhelming material superiority sustained over years of conflict. The numbers told a truth that Japanese leadership could not accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than courage. Production lines determine outcomes more decisively than tactics. And arithmetic always wins in the end, regardless of how much leaders wish otherwise, or how completely military tradition rejects such cold mathematical certainty. The story serves as eternal reminder that wars are won not just on battlefields, but in factories, shipyards, and industrial centers far from the fighting. That intelligence analysis, no matter how accurate or professionally executed, means nothing if leadership lacks the courage or flexibility to accept conclusions that contradict institutional beliefs. That the most dangerous enemy in warfare is not the opponent across the battlefield, but the comfortable certainty within one's own command structure that refuses to acknowledge inconvenient mathematical realities. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.